Hey! Welcome. Ready to explore culture, beliefs, and trends? Stay tuned. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Bridging the Gap. I am your host, Marilyn, and I will be a rising sophomore at Columbia University. On this podcast, we will be focusing on exploring a variety of topics which include culture, beliefs, and trends. So, I'm a pre medical student with an array of interests which include Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, so kicking some behind, yoga to help me find my zen, and dance for fun. Thank you for tuning in today. For today's podcast, we have a special guest, Amar Barwaj. He just graduated from Columbia and has done phenomenal research work. Let's all tune in to find out about his journey. Thank you for joining us today on Bridging the Gap, Amar. It's a pleasure having you. So tell us about yourself and where you're from.
Hi, Marilyn. Thank you so much for having me on here. I'm very excited for our conversation today. So my name's Amar Bardwaj. I'm a senior at Columbia right now. I just graduated, actually, I guess officially tomorrow. So that's very exciting. I'm originally from Santa Monica, California. That's where I grew up for about 11 years at the beginning of my life, and then also lived in Hong Kong for 4 years for high school, and then came to New York for college.
Awesome. So obviously, I know that you're majoring in chemical engineering. So what fostered your interest in STEM from a young age? And how did your high school experience help you narrow down your interests?
Yeah, I've definitely been kind of very into science since as long as I can remember, since the beginning of elementary school. And thinking back on it now, a lot of it was kind of being fascinated by the sort of typical experiments you can do with science when you're 5 years old, whether stuff floats or not, or vinegar volcanoes with baking soda, all that sort of stuff was really cool to me. Another side of it was that I really liked how definitive things were in science, which is funny for me to say now because that's not necessarily how I see it anymore. But when I was younger, I liked that, in math and in science, there's always a right answer and a wrong answer, and you can be very clear about that. And I felt a very strong divide between the sciences and the humanities, which also kind of has changed. But I remember actually recently I rediscovered some entry of a journal or something that I had made when I was in middle school, where I was talking about how if I have a different interpretation from an English teacher that I have, and they try to explain something about why it should be interpreted a certain way, their explanation never satisfies. That's what I wrote, which is kind of extreme for an 11-year-old or whatever I was. But I guess that's how I felt. That definitely different from how I see things now. I think as I've continued being very interested in the sciences and continuing with that in my professional development. But I feel like now the way I see it is that there's a great degree of creativity and subjectivity and even ambiguity sometimes in science and engineering. And that's probably what excites me the most, is what we don't know yet, what the wide range of possibilities that we have to create new technologies or make new discoveries going forward. I think a lot of that uncertainty is what compels me in science and engineering now, which is an interesting flip from how things started out. And I've also started to realize that this dichotomy between sciences and humanities isn't necessarily the right thing to focus on. I've definitely seen that being able to write, to communicate, to think in abstract terms is very important to everything that I do as well.
I know you already touched on this, but what made you declare this field of study as your major at Columbia?
Yeah, so as ashamed as I am to admit it, I actually started out at Columbia in Columbia College, so in the Arts and Sciences School. And I was actually planning on doing environmental science for my major through college. And the reason that I started at this point was, going back a little, in high school, I had gotten my start in research, doing ecology research in high school. And I really enjoyed that. looking at the project I did was about how the leaf litter from invasive plants in the northeastern U.S. affects the water chemistry and the different ecological dynamics in a lake ecosystem, and discovered some interesting behavior about how the invasive plants can harm the lake ecosystem. And I thought that was really interesting, really cool research and discovery that I did, and I could see myself continuing that. And so I entered Columbia College. I was not an engineer by any means, and I went through my first year that way. But as I was going through my freshman year at Columbia, I started feeling like I wanted to work on energy. I saw, and this has kind of been developing for a while before then, but I saw energy as one of the core pillars of our civilization, about how we operate. It's one of the undeniable needs that we have, and one that is also happens to be very closely tied with climate change and emissions and a lot of the grandest challenges that we're facing right now. So that really appealed to me, was the scale of the issue and the importance of the issue of being able to provide for our energy needs so that we can have a developing, a thriving society, but also doing that in a way that we can secure our future, we can have a sustainable framework for doing so. So as I started to get more interested in energy, I saw that environmental science wasn't really going to be helpful for that, and started to look into the engineering school. The advisor was like, okay, let's look at the transfer process. And it happened that the deadline for transfer applications was that day. So it was a bit of a rush, but I got maybe a week extension. I wrote an application to transfer and submitted that, and eventually switched over to Columbia Engineering. And once I got there, I had a couple mentors in the engineering school who I still work with to this day, who helped guide me through the process of figuring out what exactly I wanted to do. So Professor Dan Esposito and Professor Yip in chemical engineering and in earth and environmental engineering, respectively, they were, I was starting up a research project with them at the time, one that I'm still doing to this day, like I mentioned. And they talked me through the different merits and possibilities that exist within each field, within chemical engineering and earth and environmental engineering, which were kind of the two obvious choices to consider for me. And I saw that in chemical engineering, there's a really great opportunity to work on processable innovations for developing technologies. And that really appealed to me, was being able to, at a kind of fundamental level, look at how something works and how we can make it work better in terms of alternative energy technologies, sustainable energy. And so that's why I chose doing chemical engineering eventually. And the project that I was starting out at the time has grown a lot, that I've been able to lead up in both of their groups, has also enforced that vision that I've had for chemical engineering and helped me see how that looks in practice. My project was looking at being able to split water and make hydrogen using seawater instead of fresh water. And there's certain challenges to that in the impurities that you have in seawater, especially the salt in seawater. So I developed a coating that we can coat onto our device, onto the catalyst that helps run this reaction. And the coating is able to block out the impurities in seawater and still allow us to do the reaction that we want to do. So we can have what we call selectivity for the right reaction. And we can make hydrogen from seawater without having to worry about depleting fresh water. So the vision going forward from that sort of work is you can have what we might call a solar fuels rig that's floating out in the ocean offshore, kind of a much more compelling alternative to an oil rig, if you will, where you can use solar energy directly to split seawater and then make hydrogen that you can transport back to the mainland. So that's one of the visions within solar fuels is this clean hydrogen system, this sustainable zero emissions hydrogen production. And that project has been really fundamental to what I've been doing and what I plan to do going forward. I think that being able to see how we can develop solar fuels technology, and even in the span of a couple years of myself just working on this project myself as an undergrad, being able to say that I've contributed somewhat to the field. I'm sure I'll contribute more in the future, but it's a very exciting first step. That has been really encouraging, and I've been able to see myself continue doing this sort of work in developing solar fuels technologies and expanding into more areas of solar fuels, so that I can keep pushing towards that vision of being able to make renewable fuels without emissions and having those contribute, I think, very crucially to a fully sustainable energy system.
Yeah, awesome. So that was actually going to be my next question, but you already covered that. So perfect.
I beat you to it. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no worries. All right. So what clubs were you involved in on campus and how did they help mold you into who you are? What aspects of each club did you enjoy?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've enjoyed the most about being at Columbia is the wealth of opportunity in terms of student groups and outside of that as well. But there are two clubs that stand out for me in my college experience. The first one is Consilience, the Journal of Sustainable Development. So this is a student-run journal based at Columbia that publishes original research articles in sustainable development that are sent in from practitioners, professionals, researchers around the world. And then also the reason I joined Consilience was to start up a new branch of the journal. So I joined Consilience back in, I think, the end of my sophomore year. The journal quickly became a much bigger part of my college experience than I initially expected. So we created this team to write and edit briefings articles that we continue to do now. It was an avenue to elevate youth voices and perspectives in sustainable development in the climate discussion. And I think people of our generation and my peers, the other students at Columbia who I've been working with, we are on the front lines of definitely having to feel the consequences of the climate crisis in our lives and in our futures. And also in many cases are already on the front lines of working to combat this issue, to address the causes of climate change. And because of that, I think the youth have a very unique perspective and a very important perspective in everything that's going on in that space right now. So after creating this briefing side of the journal, I moved on to being the editor-in-chief along with my good friend Sophia Ahmed at Columbia, who is the co-editor-in-chief as well of Consilience. The second club that I would talk about is Sabor. Colombia's first Latino dance troupe is what we're called. So it's a Latin dance group on campus, and I joined it my freshman fall. So I actually went to Days on Campus at Columbia back in the spring of my senior year of high school. And during that Days on Campus, they had a late night activity section where they had a lesson from some people on Sabor. And I went to it. I had an amazing time. It was my first time dancing Latin dance, but also spoke to me because I'm actually half Colombian. So my mom who's Colombian has always wanted me to learn how to Latin dance, and I never really did. So I think she was very excited about that development, about the fact that I enjoyed it and joined the team. Had a lot of fun while doing it. I felt like Sabor very quickly became a core community and a family on campus, and a really welcome change of pace from everything else that was going on in my life.
Great. So you're a Marshall Scholar. That's a very great achievement. So tell us where you'll be spending your time as a Marshall Scholar and what research work will you be involved in? So obviously we're in the middle of a pandemic. How has the pandemic affected and deterred those plans?
Yeah, good question. So I am a Marshall Scholar. This is very exciting new development in the past couple months. The Marshall Scholarship program generally supports usually 2 years of graduate study at any schools in the UK. So the purpose behind the program is to send US students to the UK for this period to form connections and develop themselves as well. And it was started as a token of gratitude from the UK to George Marshall, who created the Marshall Plan after World War II to help the UK and a lot of the rest of Europe recover. So yeah, in the spirit of that whole program, I'm going to the UK to continue to explore what I'm most interested in a couple ways. So the first year that I'm planning to do in the UK is at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. And the program is called an MSc in Energy, Society, and Sustainability. So the idea is it's a very interdisciplinary look at sustainable energy, looking at the societal, economic, policy factors that all influence the deployment of sustainable energy and the workings of the energy landscape. And it's a little bit of a departure from what I've been doing. I'm a chemical engineer, so as you can see, that a lot of what I've listed isn't what I studied in class during undergrad. But as I move forward in deciding that I want to contribute to developing sustainable energy technologies and helping them be implemented, I've started to see that I need to understand this context for these technologies outside of the lab, outside of the engineering of it, because the technologies that I develop have to be positioned to be easily implemented, and they have to have a framework around them that makes it easy for them to get out into the real world. The second year is going to be a little more technical. So I'm planning to do a year of research at Imperial College London with Professor James Durant and Dr. Ivan Stevens there. So these are two really, really phenomenal solar fuels researchers who do similar work to what I've been laying out to you in terms of making hydrogen sustainably with solar energy. So the spectroscopy-based work that I'm going to do at Imperial is more in the spirit of looking at a fundamental level how the catalyst works and being able to explain it very rigorously, which I think is very exciting. So spectroscopic methods, to give a brief explanation, they probe the surface of the catalyst as in the case of the research I'm going to do, as the catalyst is working, as it's catalyzing a reaction. And by looking at what exactly is happening as this reaction is going on, you can start to get an idea of the mechanisms that are going on that cause a certain result, cause a certain reaction to be catalyzed, cause a certain reaction to proceed at a certain speed. And understanding that through the spectroscopy, I think it's very important to being able to iterate on these technologies and improve them even further. So I'm going to spend a year doing that sort of research in what we call spectroelectrochemistry, because we're combining the spectroscopy with the solar fuels chemistries, and hopefully learn a lot about these very new methods to me, and hopefully be able to bring that back to the research that I do going forward, so that I can leverage a more fundamental understanding of how the catalyst works and use that to inform the development of new catalysts in a more materials space.
So briefly, what are your goals and plans for the future after returning from the UK?
Yes, so when I get back from the UK, the first thing I'm going to do is a PhD in chemical engineering at Stanford. I was very excited to commit to Stanford just a couple weeks ago. So I'm going to plan to continue doing solar fuels research there. There are a lot of great groups at Stanford in the chemistry department and outside of it that are doing solar fuels work, and also very complementary work in sustainable energy, economics, and policy. And I'm also, as of more recently, I'm increasingly interested in the policy and economics surrounding these, like I mentioned. So I'm hoping during my PhD, in one way or another, to factor that into the work that I do, to somehow take a look at how policy affects the technologies I'm developing. One of the reasons I'm most excited to be at Stanford is that there's a lot of opportunity to get involved on all fronts of sustainable energy, broadening my experience in the policy and economics.
You've achieved quite a bit as an undergrad. So how did you structure yourself to achieve all of your goals? And then secondly, what advice would you give others listening to this podcast who are interested in achieving similar goals?
Okay. Yeah. I think one of the things that has benefited me a lot as I went through my undergrad experience was not being afraid to have an audacious vision for what I could do. And, easier said than done. But I feel like as I went through my college experience, there were a lot of points where I was probably a little bit too bold in what I wanted to do or achieve. I can think of, for one, going up to professors as a freshman fall student and wanting to start up my own research project without the support of a grad student. That was kind of edgy of me to do. But these sorts of things that came throughout my college experience. I think that the fact that I was able to believe that I could do these sorts of things, I think that was very enabling and led to a lot of great outcomes that I'm very happy about. Yeah, and the looking back now, I think I definitely couldn't have imagined how my college experience would have gone the way it did. And I think the reason for that is because I was very open to opportunities and very eager to pursue new opportunities that I found exciting. Another thing was that I was really guided by this core desire to help the environment in one way or another. That is really core to who I am and what I do. And everything that I've done is really informed by that and motivated by that. So that has been really nice to see myself pulling together a range of different experiences and different pursuits that all tie back to this core at the end of the day. So even though working on a journal that's in sustainable development versus making a sustainable energy technology, they're very different on the surface, but they all come from the same place for me. And I think following that guiding mission has been really helpful in helping me create a thread of different sorts of experiences that are all very important to me in college. One other thing I would say is I think it was very helpful to not be afraid to ask for help and to accept help. With a lot of, especially with scholarships like the Marshall, people on the outside very easily start to see it as a very individualistic thing. Like, I'm a Marshall Scholar and it's me, I'm the Marshall Scholar. But in reality, I think every person who goes through these processes and who is seen in that way has a whole army behind them. And that's very true for me. I've been very humbled to have help from so many people through every stage, through applying to the scholarship, but through my college career as well. People who had experience with a scholarship, people in my field, my family, my supportive friends. That made a massive difference. And I don't think I could have, had as rewarding of an experience in undergrad without that.
Lastly, are you working on any interesting passion projects at the moment?
Yeah, I think one of the benefits of being in quarantine is a little more time to work on some things. Right now that the classwork is done, the two main things that I'm working on, I don't know if they're exactly passion projects, but I'm working on writing up my manuscript on the research that I was doing in solar fuels that I mentioned. So we're getting pretty close towards submitting this to a journal, which is really exciting. I'm hoping to go through the peer review process pretty soon. And another thing that I haven't mentioned is over this past semester, I've been doing some work at Columbia Center on Global Energy Policy, which is a policy think tank, so to speak, that does research in a whole range of energy policy. So I joined a group there this past semester and have been working on creating a report with them about the economics of different methods to reduce emissions. Very similar technologies. I'm looking at solar photovoltaics, for example, but from a much different lens than I have in the engineering curriculum.
All right, great. It was a pleasure interviewing you today, Amar. Thank you very much for your time and stay safe.
Yeah, thank you so much, Marilyn. Have a good day.
You as well.
Stay tuned for future podcast audios and don't forget to subscribe. Join me on this journey of bridging the gap in hopes of learning and growing with one another. Peace.